Australian scientific institution was founded in 1824, but it can trace its ancestry back to at least 1777. For all those years, it's played a prominent role in the intellectual life of the city. As you know, the BRLSI hosts serious contributions by literally hundreds of expert speakers every year. Begun as a series in 1998, the annual Victor Suchard Christmas Lecture is now the premier event in the institution's calendar, and that's what we're going to listen to tonight. Each year we welcome a distinguished guest, not only to entertain, educate and provoke us, but also to remind us of the outstanding contribution of the late Victor Suchard in the 1990s to the rescue from the then dire difficulty and subsequent revivification of the Institute. Victor's drive and enthusiasm for the BRLSI meant that Bath today enjoys an outstanding resource that supports both private endeavour and public consideration of intellectual matters, both literary and scientific. Bath's not alone among British cities in possessing such a resource, but I think that we in Bath can be proud that it's today one of the very best of its kind. The Victor Suchard Christmas Lecture is also so called because it's always delivered on a date close to Christmas, usually just before it. Just at a time when we're all starting to panic about presents, crackers and plum puddings, we pause and reflect on the bigger picture. We hope that this evening may be entertaining, but we also expect to be provoked to think about something in a bigger frame, and that's exactly what we'll be doing tonight. I don't know about you, but in our family every year a Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens is an important component of every Christmas. First published on the 19th of September in 1843, A Christmas Carol was not only a stunningly good story but also a work of startling social commentary. It propelled its already well-known author to literary superstardom. Everyone now knows the story of how Scrooge the miser is awakened from his obsession with building a fortune at the expense of others by a visit from the shade of his lately dead partner, Jacob Marley. Visited by 3 Christmas ghosts, Scrooge first learns of the way that things used to be at Christmas, then how they are now, and then, most terrifyingly, what Christmas may be like in the future. The problem that Dickens was addressing in that book was, of course, the ancient one of poverty, power and greed. In the early 19th century, Britain was rich, but the Industrial Revolution had encouraged the unfair distribution of wealth and power to grind the face of the poor. No one would deny that the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century was doing some good things too, but it took a Dickens to awake society to its dark side, and he did it by introducing his readers to the ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, and especially Christmas future. Today we're in the middle of a different kind of revolution, this time an information and computation revolution. Do our digital futures also threaten the joy of Christmas for those who live on the wrong side of the digital tracks? Tonight, our Christmas lecturer is going to introduce us to the digital ghost of Christmas future. And I'm honoured to be able to introduce Professor Joanna Bryson as the 2020 BRLSI Victor Suchard Christmas Lecturer. Joanna Bryson is Professor of Ethics and Technology at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin, in Germany. She holds degrees in Psychology and Artificial Intelligence from the University of Chicago, the University of Edinburgh, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I know her because she was for a number of years on the staff of the Computer Science Department here at the University of Bath. She's a prominent commentator on the social impact of artificial intelligence and is an advisor to governments in various parts of the world. Joanna's title for this evening is Artificial Intelligence and Human Lives Looking Forwards, 2025 to 2070. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Joanna Bryson. If we were all together in the BRLSI's beautiful Georgian rooms in Bath, you could all clap. But as you're at home in front of a screen, the applause will have to be virtual. Maybe at the end of the evening we'll get a chance to applaud really, but for now you'll just have to get on with it in mute mode. There, Joanna, you can see that the welcome is rapturous. So, please, would you now deliver the 2020 Victor Suchard Christmas lecture?
So the focus of my talk is near future, 2025 to 2070. And I was originally asked to think about, actually I was asked to think about the next 5 years, and that's really hard. It's to some extent it's a little easier to smooth over a lot more variation and to think about, so that's why I said not until 2025, but then for the next 50 years. Let's look at that. So, so a lot of people are like, where's my flying car? Where's this supposed AI that I hear so much about? And I would argue that it's absolutely everywhere. So it isn't that there's suddenly robots and flying cars. It's that our entire lives have been changed, and the way that we communicate and the way that we know things has changed. So before you're going to believe me saying that, we have to agree what artificial intelligence is. And I could see there's a little bit of a delay on the fancy effects here. But sometimes I've heard full professors of AI say, we can't build AI because we don't even know what intelligence is. That's like not understanding how words work. Okay, if you could say the word, it has some kind of meaning. That was my 2017 paper, actually, in Science. Yeah, so there's always a way to do that. I'm going to focus on this one particular definition here. All right, this is a really, it's from 1882. It's a very well-established definition, but also it's very useful because it was designed for us to think about how different animals are more or less intelligent. So it was designed not just to talk about humans, and so therefore it's kind of useful to AI. So let me rephrase this in more simple terms. Intelligence is the capacity to do the right thing at the right time. Or another way to think of that is intelligence is a form of computation. All right, it's the transformation of information about the present context into an action. All right, now a lot of people think that artificial intelligence, that intelligence is, I don't know, there's still some kind of Cartesian thing that's happening in another sphere, and it's some sort of magic. It's not. It's a physical process, and that means that being intelligent requires time, it requires space, and it requires energy. And that's why people talk, that's why you go out and buy computers with more processors. You worry about the amount of power that this machine learning is taking. It's real. It's a physical, real thing. It's not just an abstraction, right? Not to insult math, but it is a physical process. Okay, build. So if you just think of an agent as a vector of change, all right? So clearly anything that can act is a vector of change. So yes, anything intelligent must be an agent. But even chemicals can be agents. There's chemicals that cause reactions to happen. The thing that we care about, and that's literally like almost what caring is defined by, is moral agency. We really want to know who it is that's responsible for their actions. And the thing about moral agency is that this is not some kind of universal. So different societies have different ideas about when you become responsible for your own actions. How old do you have to be until you're an adult? How old do you have to be until you can consent to sex? Or how old do you have to be to fight in a war, right? These are things that different societies have different opinions about. Some societies don't think you're an adult until you're a male and your father's died, right? So it could be very, very different. Similarly, there's a symmetric other side of what we really care about. We care about who's responsible, and then we care about what they're responsible for. And here too, I mean, there's some commonalities. For example, almost every society, babies matter a lot, right? And that's the best predictor of a failure of a state, is if they cannot keep their infant mortality down low, right? If it starts increasing, then the government is going to fall. So but there's other things like, we've only recently realized that the environment might be part of our responsibility. So the environment is not a moral agent. You can't hold the environment responsible for things, but we could be responsible for it. Okay, so now the stuff that I said before, you can look that up. You can go to the Stanford philosophy thing online, encyclopedia online. This is a weird thing that I say. I would argue that when you're thinking about ethics, given that the moral agents and the moral patients are defined by the society, to me, that's what the core of ethics is. It's like, well, who's responsible and what are they responsible for? And so that would imply that ethics also is socially determined. Now, people hate this because they want to say our society is more ethical than some other society, or that we're more ethical than we were in the past. You can still say that, all right? You just have to choose a little bit more. You can't just say more ethical. You have to say more ethical in terms of inclusiveness, or more ethical in terms of infant mortality, or something like that. You have to actually use a little extra piece, okay? But what's great about this is it helps you see why parts of the things we think are ethics are directly about this responsibility, but the other parts are about things that really are only just saying, who's in the society. So how do you dress? What kind of foods do you eat? Things like that become a means by which you identify the other people that you're working together with, that you can hold responsible. So I think that this is not going to be a big core part of the rest of my talk. I just think it's an important piece. This is the most important piece of the rest of the talk. Oops, not that, sorry. I just talked to you about that. This is the most important thing about the rest of the talk, which is, if you can accept these kinds of definitions of understanding intelligence, then artificial intelligence becomes very easy to define, and it's easier to recognize and understand, okay? So it's it's anything that's intelligent that somebody intentionally built, all right? So this goes back to, how does AI relate to humans? It's something that we're responsible for, right? We intentionally constructed it. Now, I'm not saying that we can't intentionally, it's, of course, sometimes we intentionally construct things that then do things we did not intend, right? And actually, by these definitions, you might even think of things like a government or a company as a form of AI, because they're designed to some extent, although of course there they have the human agents, they're responsible as components of them, but they can also do things we don't necessarily intend, or that the owners don't necessarily intend. All right, again, that's a digression down another potential talk. This one I want to talk more about the future. But coming back into this piece here, I talked about this already, the intelligence, the artificial intelligence, deliberately built, all right? And then, yeah, this is another assertion. I'm sorry, this is a little bit PC. You flummoxed me with how important the talk was. If you can accept that's all there is to AI, right? This is what we have all over the place in our software engineering, right? Your phone is acting, right? It's telling you things. It's your weird speakery thing. If you buy those and you talk to them, they're telling Amazon about you, right? So all kinds of devices. Your email is suggesting how you spell words now, right? And maybe adjusting your grammar to be a little more American, right? These things are happening all around you. And so if you're looking for the, Arnold Schwarzenegger or something, you may not have noticed that you've become entirely wrapped in an AI cocoon, and that's joining all the people together, not only here, but across, well, I even define here, right? I'm not even in the EU with you guys anymore. So, but not only on this continent, but also transnationally, across geographies. So that was all just the introduction on definitions. Now let's talk about, I'm gonna move into a bit about talking about more about the relationship between AI and human intelligence. Then I'll get into talking about the past, and then I'll talk about the future. I am not a ghost though. I guess I'm kind of a ghost of Bath. I don't know if you know, I used to live in Bath for a long time. And then the recommendations at the very end here. Well, not the very end, then the Q&A. So going back to the relationship to human intelligence, I want to show you something. A lot of people have complained that AI ethics is like, oh, you know, there's 200 sets of principles and, you know, it's just spinning its wheels. It's not doing anything. And I always have to be defensive. I was a professional programmer for 7 years. I have a PhD in AI. You know, my PhD is about the systems engineering of real-time human-like AI. But I also noticed even back during my PhD that people got confused about AI. And so I've been publishing ethics papers on this side. Anyway, the point is that it isn't just that there's 200 weird principles, you know, people working on things. There's also been convergence. And the OECD in 2019 put together a set of principles, and then they got the G20 to sign up to it as well. And a few other countries just randomly signed. I shouldn't say randomly, they're like OECD observers or something. So we've got 50 national governments, including the UK, including Germany, including China, including America, I'll have signed up to these. So let's see what they are. There's fortunately only 5 of them. The first one is that AI should benefit people, all right, and the planet by, you know, as it says, by driving inclusive growth, sustainable. So this whole thing about the UN Sustainable Development Guides. Yeah, so sustainable development and well-being, right? So this is the point. We've all agreed that AI is about people, okay, and about sustainability, right? All right. The AI systems ought to be designed in a way that respects human law, human rights and the rule of law. So the human rights thing was only the last 2 or 3 years. Everybody was trying to reinvent ethics for AI. And then the UN noticed, and they're like, you guys, we've been spending like 70 years developing human rights law. And we're like, oh, okay. So we plugged it in. It's great. You know, you just need people to tell you about things like that. So yeah, democratic values and diversity. Yes, China signed up to this. And they should include appropriate safeguards, for example, enabling human intervention where necessary to ensure fair and just society. Okay. One of the things that's really important to understand about the second principle is that given that AI is an artifact, and given law also is an artifact, but a much older one that we've spent thousands of years building around who we are, building us around us apes, right? You know, that like, you know, you wouldn't be able to throw a robot in jail and have it care. But any social animal, like a guppy or a sheep, would really, really care about being in solitary confinement is torture, you know, so for a social animal. But so we have you know, millions of years of evolution, we have thousands of years of development of the law, and then we have this new computer stuff. How about we build the new computer stuff so it works with the old law stuff? Great idea, right? Okay, so that's 2. Number 3, there should be transparency and responsible disclosure around the AI system to ensure that the people understand when they are engaging with the AI system. Right? The OECD is a little too French, so the they with them, right? But anyway, you get it. And can challenge outcomes. So this is related to the GDPR, right? This has been inspired by, although it's the OECD, by the advances the EU made when the UK was in the EU, making very smart advice into technology policy about how it is that we have to be able to manage AI. So transparency means that we can see through the system to who is accountable for its actions, right? So the responsible disclosure. Yeah. So, but the point is that we can see who is responsible. All right. An AI system must function in a robust and secure and safe way, okay, throughout their lifetimes. Again, the thing here is that this is another innovation by the EU that they've noticed that, for example, you could buy a camera that's sitting on your baby crib that's trying to make sure that your baby is alive or something. And then that only costs 25 pounds or something, 20 pounds. And then somebody hacks into it and creates a botnet that takes down Netflix. That happened like 3 years ago. Okay, that botnet is still there. Nobody does upgrades for 25-pound baby cameras, right? And nobody does. There are people that have, I don't know why you would do this, but some people have the actual light bulbs plugged into their home internet system. And then people find the passwords for the home Wi-Fi on the light bulb. It's like, don't put your light bulb on your Wi-Fi. I mean, what? Anyway, so the point is, if you are going to have a system that is AI enabled, then it needs to be cyber secure as long as people are going to be reasonably expected to use that system. And the EU has said, you manufacturer don't get to say, oh, you're only going to drive your car for 5 years. We, the EU, will go out and measure how long people drive their cars, and then you are responsible for the cybersecurity of that system for that entire period. Okay, so this is a nice innovation out of the EU into the OECD principles. And then finally, the organizations, individuals that develop, deploy, or operate, right? So the owners, the operators, and if those are the developers, right? All these things need to be held accountable for their proper functioning. So again, we need transparency to know who is accountable for what, but it's always humans, all right? So, and this is, again, has to be in line with the above principles. So the basic idea of these principles, oh, it's fun watching this sluggishly try to get itself together, is that, as I mentioned, they're human-centered, they're fair in some sense, and fairness is hard. That's another whole lecture. They're transparent, they're safe, and they're accountable, all right? Now, the interesting thing is that the OECD principles look quite a lot like the British principles of robotics, not of AI, but dating back to 2011. And I don't know if you don't already know this, look at these really carefully, and can you figure, do you see anything familiar? I don't know if you're a science fiction fan, but the first three were the Asimov's laws. So the British, unlike the OECD, actually talk about lethality. And then interestingly, they say, well, but if you're not in a policing context, if you're in a war context, you can be lethal. And that was because these were put together by a cross section that was put together by the EPSRC and the AHRC, the funding councils for the arts and for the physical sciences, who invited the military there too. And they're like, don't make rules about not killing because we're arms dealing nation. So yeah, obviously with a British accent, not an American accent there. Anyway, but the first three are the Asimov's laws, of safe robots rewritten to be something that's actually true. It's not you cannot hold a robot responsible for something, but you can hold humans responsible for things. Humans don't want to go to jail. Humans don't want to lose social status. So we can hold humans responsible. And so the first three are about the responsibility of the developers of the AI. And then the second two are about the users and the owners of AI. All right. So yeah, but the whole thing is about being human-centered. It's not just the first principle there. All right, so back to this idea again. I want to focus on this deliberately built thing. Explicit and deliberate are parts of human intelligence that humans discuss, right? There's all kinds of things we do that we don't mean to do, but or we're sorry we did or whatever, or we didn't even know we did, right? But some things we consciously choose to do. And that was part of the core about what I was saying we were doing when we're developing or designing an AI. That's what we can be accountable for. Okay, so you might reasonably say, well, why is any part of human intelligence not explicit, right? Why can't I control when I flush? Why can't I? I'm a good person. I'm not prejudiced when I'm conscious about it, but I still have these implicit biases, and they can be measured, and I accidentally do things I really wish I didn't do, right? Well, this goes back to this point that I was making before about this physical process thing. That is a constraint. And so one way you get over that constraint, over the physical cost of getting things done, is by breaking a big problem down into smaller pieces. So that's called modularity, all right? And if you've worked in organizations, if you've ever had to do any kind of problem solving, you know it's the right way to go to break things down. It makes it easier to solve a problem. And it actually takes, again, less time, space, and energy if you deconstruct the problem well, and then you can do it better, basically. You simplify the problem. So basically, conscious thought is a subset of all the parts of your brain. It is some of the modules in your brain. We can even talk about, if you want to, during Q&A about the neural parts underneath there. But it's really useful for certain kinds of things, like innovating totally new plans, including that's what we, apparently those parts of the brain looks like they were the parts for coming up with new ways to navigate around the space. If you're like a little mammal and you're a mouse or something, and you're trying to get back to your nest after you've been exploring and you want to get back quickly, right? That was the part of the brain. So it was for coming up with new plans when you've been somewhere new and you were exploring. But it turns out that this is really useful not only for planning, but also for communicating. So we're able to make plans. Communication is a kind of plan making, but it's between multiple agents, right? So the part we talk with, the part with the words, is the part that's conscious. It's very cool. I like that part of the brain, but it's not always the most reliable part of the brain. In fact, I just made a mistake and missed an appointment right before this one, right? If we do math, we have to write it down. We make more mistakes like that than we do if we've really rehearsed something. Like humans are amazingly good at doing things like recognize if they've ever seen a picture before. If you've done sports, then probably somebody told you at some point, you need to practice that until you stop thinking about it. You have to get that level of skill. So consciousness is not great for everything. It's great for certain things, right? So anyway, how do we solve that? How do we make it so that we can plan? Remember I talked about how the complexity and the cost? If you're planning, you're trying to think of a lot of pieces. And the way that you think about a lot of pieces is by thinking of them very abstractly. Okay, that again brings the cost down. But when you're building on top of these kind of abstractions, then the technical term for these abstractions is heuristics in AI. It's like these good guesses that we've found through some kind of wandering around. And I don't mean natural selection here necessarily, just that you've accrued over time a collection of things that tend to work. Well, or they worked until now, but it may be that somebody will find a way to disrupt. There was every president always releases their tax returns. We don't need to put that in the law, right? And then someone decides not to release their tax returns. Probably it will get stuck into the law now, right? So that's the kind of thing where you have pieces that you had been working with consciously, and you have other pieces that were just working implicitly. Just it was the way things went naturally. Okay, so for trying to regulate artificial intelligence, what are we going to do? I mentioned the AI is software. Generally speaking, you can have hardware, but anyway, let's stick to software for a while. And the European Union, and they're sorry to keep going on about them, but they're doing a lot of the regulation right now. They in their white paper said, oh, it's necessarily opaque. No, as I said before, anything about AI is a design decision, right? So we don't have to use opaque AI, but opaque AI can be pretty cool. So we quite often use it. You've probably had talks before about deep learning and things like that. It's not totally opaque, but it's kind of hard to know what every little piece is doing. But guess what? We regulate banks and pharmaceutical companies and all kinds of things that have humans in them. And humans have all these neurons in their head, and we don't know what those do either. Or we don't know exactly what each one does anyway. We know overall how they behave. So similarly, we can do that with AI. If we want to regulate artificial intelligence, we aren't regulating the robots themselves or something. We're regulating how humans behave when they decide to build or train, if you use machine learning to build, or to test, right? Which you better do. If you didn't test, then that's culpable too. So how you deploy it, how you monitor it, that it's running once it is deployed. Okay, sorry, I'm missing a comma there too. So a good maintainable system, right, is, well, there's this thing called systems engineering. It's a discipline, right? It's a discipline that preceded AI and preceded computer science, but it's like one of the 5 core subsets of computer science. How do you actually put the system together? All right, so to do that well with software requires, first of all, you architect the system. Those modules I was just talking about, you decide, what is the system going to know? What is it going to be able to do? What are the, how is it sensing? What kind of information is coming in? This is about designing the final system, right? So just what does the architecture of the system look like once you've got it running? And then you may also need to separately architect a system that builds that system, right? So if you're going to use machine learning to build the system, but then you turn it off before you release it, okay, then you have a separate set of components. You need to keep track of that. The point is that any system that if your company is dependent on this, and your company is large, there's multiple livelihoods depending on it, you better keep track of that. You might lose a programmer or something, so you need to keep track of what are all the pieces, who built them, where is all that stuff, right? Besides that, you need to secure the system, right? And this is essential. People keep thinking, sorry, I don't want to get into politics, but Theresa May, like, she really, really wanted that everybody should trust AI. I went to so many meetings about how can we get people to trust AI. And then she also really, really wanted that nobody had cybersecurity, that there was these back doors, right? It's like, you cannot trust a digital system. It's the wrong metaphor anyway. You don't trust a system like you trust a person. You don't let a system innovate and maybe cheat a little bit. That's not a good idea. But anyway, you shouldn't rely on a system that has, that's digital, that works like a laptop or a computer, if it doesn't have cybersecurity, right? Just don't do that. Okay. So cybersecurity really matters. Do your upgrades. All right. Anyway, so it isn't only the system itself that needs to be cyber secure. If you're going to be able to regulate and see if people have been doing the right things when they built the AI, then you need to keep track of the logs, like the logs of how they built it, who built it, why did they build it, what did they change, when did they change it, what were the intentions they had when they built the system. There's these systems that are disadvantaging people because they're from minorities, right? Was that intentional? Was that because somebody wanted to make sure that those people weren't able to vote so that they were in jail? Or was it accidental, that people didn't do enough testing to notice that there was this disadvantaging happening, right? You ought to be able to tell that from the logs. Right now, too often people do it by hacking into the emails of Mark Zuckerberg's email becomes something that we testify about after Brexit, right? That it shouldn't only be the emails, right? There should be complete records of this stuff. Another thing to worry about, if you weren't already worried enough, or if you aren't asleep, I don't know how you're feeling right now about these pieces, is where did the software libraries come? So quite a lot of people program just by downloading stuff from the internet, and then they put their novel new pieces in, and they compile it all. But those libraries could have come from anywhere, and this is the big cybersecurity failure of the week. A company, it was a pretty reliable, apparently, they're anyway widely used company, a networking company. They had compiled one of the libraries. Somebody very smart and very organized had gone back, and one of the companies that they sourced their software libraries from had also been invaded. And so they got bad software in one of the libraries, and it went out with an upgrade, and it got into all of their customers. So not only the US Federal Reserve, it's NATO, it's the European Parliament, it's Australia, it's quite a lot of agencies in the UK that use the same software. So we don't know for sure who was listening to what. We just know that they found the people who were listening, more or less, they have a pretty good idea of who was listening to these couple of institutions in America. But there's a lot more that's going to be coming out. Anyway, that was done through two methods. One was, first of all, sneaking into the software libraries, and then and then having that get encoded into the software, and then going out into the update, right? And then the second thing was also they actually went in physically. So somebody went in physically and got the credentials. That was a hardware thing. So it was obviously a big act of espionage. Anyway, that's an aside. So it locked the doors too, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm mostly talking about that you need to know where your software libraries came from. Also, again, if you're training with machine learning, you need to know where the data libraries come from, because people can sneak stuff into the data that makes your system learn sort of the opposite of what you want, or to give you a similar kind of like that little backdoor entry thing I was just talking about, like that, to sneak in a way to be invisible, for example, to a camera or something. So you need to keep track of the cybersecurity. And then I already sort of said this, and this is in the wrong order here, sorry. But you log with secure revision control every change to the code. Who made the change, why, and when. I already talked about that. In machine learning, okay, the machine learning is first of all, the machine learning is also an algorithm. Somebody programmed it, right? But then secondly, then they set a lot of parameters and try to get this all to work, right? So you need to keep track of that too. Okay. So this is all stuff you have to keep track of. And then you should also, for proving due diligence, keep track of the testing you did. How did you decide it was okay to let this out to be a product, to be safe in the real world? Okay. So you keep track of that. And then in a real system, while it's running, this is just, you don't have to keep it all the time. Again, personal data could get swept up in this. You should run it all the time, but you don't keep it for a long time, right? You keep it for as long as you might not have detected an error, but keep track of the inputs and the outcomes, the decisions of the operational system. And this kind of information is available. Like I said, you don't need to understand. Now we could still have a completely mysterious, deep learning magic, well, not magic, nothing's magic, but big neural network in the middle of it. These are all about the human processes that brought the AI into existence so that people are using it. And we can go back and say, did you do due diligence? Have you checked things correctly? If not, you're accountable for the damage that you've done to our society or to an individual or whoever was damaged by your system that had not been properly designed. Now, sometimes there's no perfect knowledge. Sometimes there will still be bad things happen that's really nobody's fault. But most of the time, everything that was an understandable mistake once is not an understandable mistake twice. Okay, so we keep track of these things, and then we use these kinds of processes, and we enforce liability, and we get redistribution a little bit. All right. So the disruption that I'm worried about, I talked about disruption on a previous slide. The disruption I'm worried about right now, of course, is governance. That's why I went to a governance school. So what is governance, right? I would argue that it's explicit, deliberate regulation. Okay, what's regulation? Regulation is just the means by which we perpetuate ourselves, right? Breathing is a kind of regulation. There's gene regulatory networks that keep cells going, right? So it drives me insane when companies say, "Oh, don't regulate us." What are you talking about? Of course, and we'll be self-regulating. Yes, of course you will. You'll be self-regulating and you'll be self-governing, but you will also be other governed. Okay, you will also be governed by your competition, other people in your sector, and by your government. Maybe there's multiple governments that will be involved if you work transnationally, right? But all these companies that are fighting against a regulatory framework are actually all being upregulated in biological terms by their governments. They're all having money pumped into them. They're getting tax breaks because everyone wants a digital economy. It's just nuts. Anyway, I don't know if anybody here is the people that are trying to evade AI regulation, so I'll just keep going on. I want to make the point here is that you need to be in some kind of regulatory context in order to thrive, right? And it's yeah. Some people think that innovation is the whole goal, but again, you're not thinking about time. It's magical thinking. It's about how many innovations can you keep together for a long time, right? So she gets some kind of payoff from them, right? Sustainability always matters. It's never just about, the corporations are not just profit maximizing in an instant. If they're really profit maximizing, they have to last. And if they're trying to last, they have to care about the communities they live in. So I don't know. Anyway, I hope now, that was probably not what you were expecting when you were going to hear about humans and AI, but I just tried to describe to you how you get where AI comes from and how humans can control it. And in fact, that humans are accountable for it, that we're the ones who built it. All right. So now I'm about to talk about the future. But before I do, I want to look back in the past a little bit. I don't know if you noticed that I mentioned, yeah, here's the past actually. I don't know if you noticed, I said I was going to look 50 years in the future. And I don't know if you're as incredulous as I am that 50 years in the past was only 1970. If there's anyone here born after 1970, that's cool. But this is also shocking to me. This is the United States, and apparently there were no women in 1970. It looks like some Middle Eastern countries now. Actually, some American pictures. Anyway, that's another political discussion. Okay, so AI started actually about the 1950s, so 70 years ago. Turing, obviously Alan Turing, I'm sure you've heard about him before, was apparently motivated in finding computer science in the early 20th century by the death of a friend when they were both like about 14. And he really was just trying to imagine, how could it be that I could still talk to my friend or something like my friend? And so that was what was making him think about computing. So that was arguably, the stuff goes back, even more than the 1950s. But the 1950s is when, again, Alan Turing invented the Turing test, and also some other Americans came up with the word artificial intelligence in describing a process of trying to put together something, a program that could read and write and understand language. In the 40s, actually, there was already international business machines, which already produced sort of automated computers. And they famously helped Hitler, and not just Hitler, of course, the Nazi program. It's important to remember that some of the problems that we're facing now, we've faced before, right? So when the Nazis swept across Europe in their blitzkrieg, whatever, some people were really organized. The Dutch were pretty organized, and they had all this demographic information about everybody, and the Nazis came in and they killed all the Jewish people in the Netherlands. All right. The Belgians, in contrast, were totally disorganized, and a lot of Jewish Belgians survived the war. So when you're saying this is the nature of data, and not just digital data, this was physical data, right? We're not just talking about your own government, we're talking about another government that might suddenly be your government, right? So the big changes since 1970, in my opinion, it's not just about AI. In fact, again, some people aren't even thinking there was AI yet, but a lot of it is about digitization. So when you get to the point where you have information, you have property, right, that you can move almost perfect copies of it almost instantaneously, not exactly instantaneously, not exactly free. Data is not like, again, you can't have infinite data. You don't have the whole world be produced inside of Google somewhere. That's not how it works. But you do have this abstraction that can be moved so much more lightly and easily between places than ever before. All right. So I think that like one example, and I've brought this up in this paper from 2015. It's actually a book chapter. You can find it on my webpage. I also talked about, like, I'm really worried about these elections coming up in 2016 because I guessed wrong. I didn't think it was going to be Facebook. I was afraid of Microsoft Connect because I'd seen some papers about how you just have these game things sitting on top of your television, and they're telling you what everything in your family, what your household is doing. You can see where there's going to be divorces. You can see, of course, you can see whether who they're going to vote for, because it's sitting on the television. So when the ads come on, you can see who's watching which ads, right? And you get a pretty good idea how they're going to vote by how much attention they give to these various ads. So that's what I was worried about. But anyway, it's an interesting paper. But the point here is that it's been a phenomenal change in the way children have been reared since 1970, just incredible. And mostly more recently, since like 1990. And what changed? Well, mobile phones changed. And suddenly, with that extra amount of communication, and this happens across nature too, when you bring more communication in, you start acting more like a single organism. So yeah, it's not just that like parents micromanage their children. Anyone who has children knows you're negotiating about everything. So the parents have also lost much of their free time they used to have. And the children, of course, have famously, they no longer get to run around and pick their own things to do. And so yeah, it's almost like families have become more like organisms and less like independent individuals. Computer games, some people think that's the new biggest art form. I've heard people go on at length about this. I don't like to, I used to love computer games when I was a psychologist. Once I became a programmer, that was like too much of one thing for me. But some people think this is like one of the highest art forms of the moment. There's been a massive increase in child pornography. We'd almost wiped it out in terms of magazines and things. And then all of a sudden it becomes much easier for people to get, because it's harder, again, it's easier to sneak this stuff around, right? And I think that's just one token. It's something we really, really, really care about. But if you can do that, if something is destructive of that, think of how many other things we're now able to spread around that we weren't so easy to spread around before. I think this is underemphasized, the fact that there are 4 billion fewer people in extreme poverty. Again, University of Bath has some great colleagues working in the area of extreme poverty. I first heard about it there. But between 2000 and 2015, we've moved almost half of humanity out of extreme poverty. I wouldn't say this is all about AI, but quite a lot of it comes down to new communication technology. Having access to a mobile phone gives you access to things like information, weather forecasts, what are fair market prices for the things you buy and the things you sell, right? And also, of course, there's effective altruism. It's actually effective. These quantified kinds of outreach. So yeah, and by and large, with a few interesting exceptions, again, we can talk about in Q&A, massively longer life expectancies, right? We really have made massive improvements with all this extra capacity to, well, not child pornography is not an improvement, but my point is there's been massive, massive, massive changes, and we kind of say, oh, nothing's really changed. It doesn't feel that different from the 70s, but in so many ways it's different, okay? And then, yeah, there's this other thing, which is this massive increase in transnational business, which includes wealth extraction from one country to another. All right, not necessarily, it's not a zero-sum game, right? So some of the wealth is being generated in forms of data. You know, we know stuff we didn't used to know, and that had value. That's not the only kind of public good that we're producing, but yeah, I don't want to say it's only wealth extraction, but there's an awful lot of extraction. And trust me, in Berlin, the students really care about, I don't know how it's going in the UK, they really worry about, is this a new form of colonialism? Is there a digital colonialism happening where the people are extracting raw materials from other countries and then only getting the economic proceeds in one country or two? And let's talk about that. Let's go back. Stuart set this up. And I only have one slide about this paper in here, but hey, you know, I got way more slides on this laptop if you want to see other ones. But anyway, the inequality, when you have inequality very high, and then you also tend to have polarization very high. Now, this is a graph taken from America. So that's why it starts in 1913. That was when income tax was innovated in America, because we decided to ban alcohol. It was a great plan. Anyway, so we got income tax, and so we could then measure what proportion of all the wealth, with all the income that was coming in. I shouldn't say the wealth. The wealth is probably driving this, but income is the thing that was easy to measure. So anyway, what share of all the income was going to the top 1% of earners? And this had been growing. You can read actually Churchill back when he was a liberal. The inequality had been growing in the 19th century. From the mid 19th century, it was going up and up, and also entropy was growing. It was getting harder and harder to control. And Churchill's back from some war going, what is happening? Why is it so much harder to lead than it used to be? So the gray line here is political polarization. So that's measured by, in America, again, only two parties, whether the two parties are working together in Congress. And this is national, but it was also done at every state. It's a very consistent, it's a strong result. So what happened in America, and actually also in Britain, I'm sorry I don't have these graphs for Britain, but both America and Britain, after one world war and one financial crash, enough of the elite said, okay, there's a problem here, we're going to change things. And they sort of signed up with the proletariat, and you got this thing that was called the New Deal in the US, where there was this massive increase in investment and redistribution, only to white males that were uneducated, but still it was enough apparently that you see that. So first there's this reduction of polarization, and then they managed to get the inequality down. In 1945, so like I said, Britain and America managed to pull that off in the 30s, but we were rich. We were the richest countries around. Certain other countries, say Germany, were having all their wealth extracted, and well, actually also, like, who knows what happened with Italy, but anyway, but they couldn't do this. But we made this investment in the welfare state, and we got our inequality down. In 1945, we got the whole world to sign to Bretton Woods, and we had a long period of relatively low income inequality and relatively low political polarization. Now, I'm not saying the 70s were perfect or the 60s were perfect, but we didn't have these kinds of total entropic And if you've seen, you may also have seen actually where that right angle is, where things start going pear-shaped again. It's 1978. That's when wages stopped following productivity. So wages started to plateau. So yeah, what is going on? What could be the things that cause both political polarization and inequality to go up at the same time? So the paper that we just had come out on Friday suggests that the thing that's the driver is inequality, that polarization is actually a correct response if your economic well-being is shrinking so far that you're at high risk of death or losing your house or losing your business, those kinds of catastrophic events, then you need to take a lower risk framing. And so if we assume that it's less risky to work with people more like you, that they're more predictable, then even though that's like unlikely to help you, like, because we know diversity is better, it has a better average outcome, but it's riskier because it's harder to predict people. So if you accept all these premises, then we showed that it makes sense that in when the economy is failing, or when you have increasing inequality, then the economy is failing for most people, just not for everyone, right? So even if actually Germany and China both have done a decent job of keeping the bottom wages up, so they haven't got as bad a polarization, even though they have increasing inequality. But other countries that did not, like, you know, what happened in the last 20 years in the UK, what happened to the poor there, then you get polarization, and also the US, of course. Anyway, but anyway, where did the inequality come from in the first place? And what we think is going on is that when you have, so first of all, this is like, why do we have so much entropy? When you have fewer people that get to call the shots, it gets harder to control the system. So that's again, hypothesis. We think that in the late 19th century, the inequality got driven by the new technology at that time. So railways, telegraphs, all of a sudden, smaller numbers of people could have more customers. And so just naturally, by not cheating, it wasn't like, it didn't have to be monopolistic tendencies or whatever, just naturally, technology enabled there to be a system where fewer people could reach out to more, fewer people could be the best people that could reach out to more and more customers. And so then you have fewer winners, then you have this increase in inequality that required some huge regulatory shift, which was the welfare state, right? And so now we think that problem is caused by ICT. Of course, it's not only this, you do get these things like regulatory capture. So apparently what happened to the British, to us British, I still have a passport, although I got it to have a European passport, but anyway. What happened in the UK that was regulatory capture by the financial industry. It almost looks like the UN came in and documented. They said it almost looks like what happens when oil is discovered, right? It looks like a resource curse, but it's not a resource in particular. It was the financial services. Anyway, so yeah, so you get regulatory capture, and then you get the spiraling increase in inequality. So I mentioned before this, people are running around going, what happened in 1978? Why did we, what happened, this great decoupling of wages from productivity? What I'm showing you with this graph, by just looking a little further back, is that it wasn't a great decoupling. It was well, it is, but it wasn't that was, throughout history been like that. It was that there had been a coupling, and that was a choice. That's a policy choice, and I think we need to do something similar now if we want to go forward and restabilize things, get things a little bit less crazy and entropic than they've been lately. All right, so I forgot. Sorry, this is a little bit long. I stuck this in because I thought you might care about jobs, but I'm feeling like I don't want to go too long here. Imagine this situation where I build AI that makes teachers twice as good, okay? So you could either have twice as good as schools, or you could have as many teachers. There's nothing about AI that tells you which of those is going to happen, okay? There's nothing about the software. That is a political decision. And so what matters, that's why I said, that's why I'm in a governance school now. What matters is, why wouldn't you choose the former instead of the latter, right? So yeah, so there are obviously big differences. Hopefully I don't need to tell you, but you never know. Actually, some of you guys are quite ornery, so you might be saying, yeah, let's just have half as many teachers, right? If you have half as many teachers, of course, you have fewer people with jobs, although that's a little complicated because you may have, for example, with automated teller machines, you actually had fewer people employed at every branch of a bank, but then you got more branches of banks because the branches were cheaper. So it's actually more people employed overall, but fewer people, more people even employed as tellers overall, but fewer people per school or something. So that again goes back to how do you want to define this? So it could be half as many teachers at a particular school, but a third as many students or something, I don't know. But anyway, if we assume that's not the way it went, that they just fired all those teachers, then you have fewer people with jobs. You might have higher average quality of teachers. But the other thing people might do is just choose the ones that are easier to control, right? So that's a possibility. Yeah, well, so far, and I didn't put that many of these slides in. I see somebody popping up a question here. So far that we have more AI than we've ever had, and we have more jobs than we've ever had. But I'm going to get in a minute to what I think is the real problem. It's not that we suddenly don't have jobs. I mean, that does happen sometimes with economic downturns, but it isn't. The technology doesn't seem to reduce. In fact, often it makes every individual person more productive. So there's higher value to employing people. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to quickly, I was just talking about teachers. Imagine if instead we're talking about artists. I was asked to speak to some people that were filmed. Now this is Berlin, so they're not like, it's not Hollywood. It was like, they're all indie, right? So here you could imagine that you could make films much, much more inexpensively. I mean, this is already true. That's what TikTok basically is, right? But what does that mean? It means that, yeah, everybody could do it, but then you have smaller numbers of viewers from most people, right? So it really, really changes the dynamics of everything. And also you see me complaining about the level of diversity that's in the film industry. You could have half as many people and still have like 3 times the diversity. But anyway, this is a super interesting graph. So going back to this question about, I was just at a meeting relatively recently about employment again, and this isn't really about employment, which is why I just hesitated there. This is about wages. So people think that robots will come and take the jobs, and so therefore, if you have RTI here is a repetitive task, something, I forget what I stands for, but it's exactly the kind of job you would expect a robot to be able to do, or that I'm using come on, human-centered, that somebody might build a robot to do instead, that a business might choose to use robots instead of employees. Okay, so this particular guy was interested, Perlin, was interested in how, whether being in a union kept your wage up. And as you can see, yeah, it pretty much keeps your wage up. But I was just like sitting in this talk going, wait, why is it that the people who don't have unions defending them only have their wages go down from 1983 until 1995? And the poor guy, he's like a PhD student finishing up. I mean, he's good. I'm sure he'll get a great job. But he's like, oh, we economists have a theory that actually there hasn't been any innovations in AI since 1995. I'm like, that's a really bad theory. Okay, all the deep learning stuff, all the the voice recognition, the face recognition, everything. AI has been, trust me, it's been. Well, a lot of it's been going very fast since 2007, since we had smartphones and we had more data, to be frank. But anyway, trust me, there's been a lot of AI in the 21st century. So what is actually going on here? Well, there was a pretty smart economist, is still at, a lot of people have been saying this is when there's something about China and the World Trade Organization. But anyway, that this is again American data, sorry, that Americans were suddenly competing with Chinese people and the Chinese people had lower wages and factories were moving overseas and the wages came down. So that was when that period of opening. So it wasn't AI at all. It was, I mean, maybe a little bit because you're able to transfer these skills maybe a little more easily with digital technology. But basically it was this capacity to compete with people on another continent. And the interesting thing was at the same meeting, there were some people with the same data. Oops, sorry, wrong computer. I don't have the beautiful graph, but the same thing happened in Germany when the wall came down. So in Germany, the wages came down in the 1990s after the fall of the wall, because then plausibly you could go to East Germany, to Poland. It's 40 miles from here, incidentally. So they that was when they had to capitulate on the wages, even though they had very strong unions and still do in Germany. So yeah, this is actually much easier to type than to read. Machines don't lower the wages, people do, or at least access to people. And I do think that there's an issue here with AI, because AI makes it easier to do jobs. So like you don't have the same advantages, like if you've done a long apprenticeship or something to become a truck driver. I don't know if you do apprenticeships to become a truck driver, but truck drivers are a great example because their wages have dropped by half. And it's still not an easy job, but it's a lot easier than it used to be back in the 60s or 70s. Now they make half as much because there's GPS, there's power steering, there's all these kinds of things like that, spreadsheets, that make it so that a larger number of people can do it. When there's a larger number of people, the wages come down. So I do think AI may cause problems like that. And that might be part of the reason that we're seeing the hollowing out of the middle, is that there's a bunch of people that we haven't even properly evaluated. I think we might be able to bring back in some of the structure, but there's the people we don't know, that we know we don't have enough of, and then there's a bunch of people that we can't even figure out who's doing better, and the wages are relatively flat. Probably they shouldn't be. Anyway, so that's sort of the past up until the present. Now let's talk about the future. So, well, actually, I just said I was doing the present. I forgot. I'm going to say a little bit more about the present and its limits. And then actually, I changed this because it was Christmas. So I decided I should have Utopia at the end, right? If it was some other time of the year, then maybe I would do Dystopia at the end. So anyway, back to the present. So I already told you about these principles. These are limits to what you should do. I mean, not just as principles, but we're seeing the European Commission, at least, that is putting out software. The European Union that was just released this week, Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, are going to be at least making these law, and then hopefully more than the GDPR, they're going to start enforcing it. They haven't been enforcing it a lot. But I want to go back to like this incredible amount of change since the 1970s. And yet we've all lived through it. And do we think, I don't know how much you feel like things have changed, right? Clearly things are different, especially now that we're listening to talks from around the world, and that clearly stuff has changed. And yet, how much has our life has changed? Well, how much of our life had changed from being a chimpanzee? Did you ever guys go and watch, Jane Goodall? Yeah, lots of things are different. No houses, no running water. But other things like, a baby throws a fit and the mother like gives up and gives them what they want if there's other chimpanzees around, but if they're by themselves, they would have ignored them. We have those experiences too, right? So humans are both the point of AI and also the limit of exactly how much can change, right? At least change stably, okay? So we're always going to have the human condition. Life implies death, death implies children, children implies families. Those things are going to be around, right? Unless we do manage to nuke ourselves, anyway, that's another. You can ask that in Q&A too if you want. So AI is already becoming embedded in all software, right? And hopefully, software will be limited to devices, as I mentioned before, that are expensive enough to be maintained. I'm very, very skeptical about the Internet of Things. There is an Internet of some things, but let's not put forks on it. Let's not put light bulbs on it. Let's not put thermostats on it. Anyway, everything could become clearer. Because we have everything is digitized, all those records I was mentioning, we could have all those records of quite a lot of things. And I don't think we want to do this with individuals. I do think we want to leave individuals enough space. We need to defend. It's like private property, right? It's not that the police couldn't get into your house. It's not that the army couldn't get into your house. It's that if anyone gets into your house, you have recourse to the law. So it's not that you are actually personally able to defend your house. It's that we as a society have said, you get to have that space, okay? We need to do that same thing. We need to create that same zone of privacy around our information and our behavior. But that's true of individuals. I don't think it has to be true. I don't think we should be trusting. So that's what trust is about. Trust is that zone of privacy. That we shouldn't be trusting governments and we shouldn't be trusting corporations. We should be using these new tools we have to ensure, to be vigilant, right? The cost of good government is eternal vigilance, right? That's quite straightforward. So anyway, everything could become clearer. Companies and governments could be more transparent. Artificial intelligence could be one of the means by which we help make it clearer how really complicated things are working. And I think that's like a really exciting idea, really. And it's also already happening to surprising extents. And actually, I think that's part of why we're seeing some of the transnational risk-taking we're seeing, because people don't want us to know who's laundering money. Apparently, and this is again, it's like rumors, but apparently Putin thought that the Panama Papers were not some like incredible innovation of journalism that transnationally figured out how to expose this whistleblowing information. No, he thought it was Hillary Clinton coming after him personally because he was so mortified by it, right? So it was all about him, right? And so therefore he tried to hurt Clinton, who apparently he thought would always be elected because like him, she would have the reins of power, so she was going to be elected. But he was trying to just make her a less powerful leader. Anyway, that's, who knows? That's just what people say in those circles. The point is that, yeah, social mobility could be higher, education could be more accessible to everyone. And it's possible, we don't know, but I suspect that countries that supported transparency and good government could actually win. That may be a longer term, more stable solution. I actually, again, sorry to keep bringing up the EU. I was one of the last trips I took before March was to Brussels. And I heard the EU bidding to, or somebody from the EU, like the person in charge of Africa, talking to a bunch of African leaders. And she was saying, look, if you have an emergency, you have something really urgent that has to happen, go to China. They came in, they helped with Ebola, great. The EU is not fast. But if you want a long-term solution that works, something that's stable, and it's going to be stable because it's going to help your people are going to like it too, then come to us, because we're good at those kinds of solutions, these longer-term stable solutions. So anyway, if we can imagine that countries that support transparency and good governance may actually have a winning solution here, may have a means to be stable, and assuming we can get the security working, right? Do we want to talk about this? I feel like I've gone on too long. You guys can come back. Well, I'll tell you what this is about. There's something really weird happened a few months ago, and everybody was talking about, not everybody, but I was in multiple meetings where people were saying, oh, Europe has to do everything it can to help America, because otherwise we're all going to be China. Like China will just take over the world. It's sweeping, it's amazing, and it's scary. And it is, it's doing horrific things to its minorities. The Uyghurs, not only the Uyghurs, but, it is, there's no excusing that. But actually the United States does horrible things to their minorities too, right? It is like, way disproportionately more people in jail, like lead poisoning in the children, unbelievable, And the idea that we were so much worse off, right? So you notice that the UK is left out there, the little yellow bit there, but that's for market capitalization, which market capitalization is a weird thing. It does give you an enormous amount of power, but if you look at most of the large market cap companies in Europe, they're in Switzerland, right? And not in so these are not every large market cap company. These are ones that have at least 2 patents in WIPO in the AI, in one of the AI domains in 2019. Okay, so these are, we're all familiar with these now, exponential, the log. So so what you see is that actually, in terms of IP, Europe is comparable to China. You also see that China has apparently just decided they're going to play this weird large market cap game, but they've had 2 companies that they've just said, you guys, you get to have that much power. You got to watch after each other, I guess, too, right? There's a few other companies that are doing their thing, and but basically, if it comes down to it, the whole world is not on the same scale. It's like, well, it's about half of what America has. And also look at the rest of the world. The rest of the world is doing a lot of things, besides Europe and China. So this whole idea that there's a Cold War between 2 things, and that Europe has to pile in on one side, I think is a very distorted conversation. But anyway, I don't know if you even heard that conversation. If not, I apologize for spending so much time arguing against it. All right, so dystopia. We're near the end here. What is the worst thing that could happen in the next 50 years? Well, you know, we know what it looks like, or maybe we don't. It hasn't been that bad in Britain, at least. It's arguably, Guy Standing says that it is that bad for the people on welfare now in Britain, that they are that surveilled, and they have no access to. They can't even protest because they know that they'll lose their records immediately or whatever. But anyway, it's not as bad, I hope, to be in the UK as it was living under Stalin. Well, maybe it's about the same. Living under East Germany under the Stasi, certainly it's not as bad as currently in Syria. So we know that what misery looks like, and again, there's only limits to how miserable human beings can be. Then they die, right? So that's but I am seriously worried that countries that think that AI is going to solve their problems are also countries that aren't taking that much care about COVID, or that there might be some weird trade-off that's going on there. You know, it wasn't just the 3 or 4 famous cases we hear. There's been at least 120 times in the 20th century that there was mass killings. So this trade-off of, you know, are human lives important? Again, that's what the whole human rights, the UN and the International Court of Human Rights, European Court of Human Rights, are set up to try to address. But it could easily be something that people decide isn't worth the time. So yeah. Again, people thinking that they have more control over a more homogeneous population, so reducing or removing diversity is a problem, or allowing populations to attrition by not providing adequate health care. Those are both, to me, things I worry about. And I believe that maybe this is just a stupid Twitter thing, but I don't think so. There's a frightening number of people who think that we can meet our goals with technology. And again, it depends what our goals are. But I don't even believe that, even if you decide the most important goal is like math or something, like, you know, let's solve some huge mathematical structure, let's make some huge mathematical art. I don't think you're going to have machines running more than 20 years longer than there's people. I mean, how old a machine do you have around in your house? There might be a couple things around here that are like 80 years old that are, you know, like there's wood things that are a couple hundred years old, but there's not. That having mechanical devices or digital devices that run even as long as a human lives is unusual, extremely unusual. So the sort of, I like E&M Biggs too, but it just, the idea that you're going to have technology that somehow that's going to be a vector by which we can express our culture, which is our true treasure more than our biology. I just don't think it works. You know, biology has evolved for billions of years to be incredibly robust. So I think every kind of goal that makes sense to a human, I think we need humans to be at the core of that. So yeah, I mentioned before, without diversity, you have less creativity, less innovation, and then again, you're more likely to be exposed if something changes, which things always change. And of course, the other thing, which I've mentioned earlier, destroying the ecosystem. Now, again, you may say, well, that's not much innovation. You're talking about things we already know are problems. Yes, it's only 50 years, just like 1970 isn't that long ago. You know, whatever I'm doing, 2075, it's not that far in the future. All right. So yes, some of these things are human condition kinds of things. It's just that we're making it easier to fall into that. Unless, of course, we figure out ways to make it harder. So let's, oops, sorry, I forgot. I'll get to utopia. I promise I'll get to utopia, but this is important. Back to that sustainability thing, that last bullet point there. Do you guys know what this is? Anyone want to make a guess? Let's see if the chat, I'll look at the chat. No, Stuart will look at the chat. Anyone, do you know who's winning? Well, we can see who's winning. What are they winning at? I gave you a big clue. No one's going to say anything there. You're all asleep now. Okay. Global warming, right? Impacts of global warming. You're all trying to figure out where Britain is. Britain's about the same, right? It's an island. Nothing changes. Well, except for the water comes up. Then we're in trouble. But this is more about agricultural. So yeah, big winners, big losers. So arguably, war is one of the definitions of war is dismantling your enemy's infrastructure so that they lose autonomy. That means that their goals are subsumed by yours. Okay, if you're the one who's the attacking agent. And I wouldn't be surprised if people in 100 years look back at now and say that there was already war going on. It's just not trench warfare anymore. But we are figuring out ways to interfere with each other's goals, and we have been doing so for some time. You know, not just one direction. Anyway, back to utopia. Happy, fulfilled, localized, sustainable, hedonistic. I don't know what you think, but to me it seems that, as I mentioned, the hipster movement. I hate to say it, yeah, it's very entitled of me, but the having people express themselves creatively and connect to other people and have decent lives, that's the best that we as apes can hope for. That makes us very happy. Creative cultural economy. One of the things I'd love to have is better real-time translation. We're very close to that. It's not going to be perfect. Human translation will always be better, you know, more artistic, more knowledge. The more you really know about a culture, the better. But hey, you know, for those of us who do go out and get some education, it's just like, I just really look forward to everyone hearing all the talks in their native language, and then hopefully having some subtitles in English so I can guess better what's being said. I think that would be great. So yeah, that you would take a hike somewhere and get a different kind of food, you know, that kind of, you know, just being able to have more experiences. I think in order to achieve this, to avoid the kind of predation and manipulation we've seen, then we actually need technology. We can't just outlaw. You know, this is what I was talking about before. It's not enough to say, don't misuse my data. It's also that we're going to have to set up structures to proactively police that, to recognize when people are being manipulated, to recognize when data is being used inappropriately. And it's not going to be about one person. You're going to have to look, because it's statistical. You might have gotten lucky in predicting something. So now we need to say, well, how, you know, let's look across the class of people. Do they seem to be getting exploited? So I think we're going to need extra governance in that. I think governments and corporations have to work together better than they have been in America, at least. They need to recognize their mutual needs, and they need to defend their citizens and their customers and their employees, the right to flourish, the innovation, freedom of thought. And they have to limit each other's corruption. Corruption happens. It's a constant competition. You know, you're always, there's a policing component to that. But, you know, we can't just say, oh, all the problems with AI are these evil companies. A lot of them are trying, they really are trying, as much jokes as they're really trying to be good. And you know, some of them aren't. Some of them are just like, whatever, right? They see what's perceived as evil as a business opportunity. But quite a lot of them are trying very hard to do stuff that's actually cool, or that would actually benefit humanity, and so they just need some help. And the same, we all know the same with governments. That governments can do a lot of damage too. So we need these tools, and we need to figure out a better way, also so in civil society, of keeping these things together. And yeah, that was sort of the point here. Citizens have to be engaged with the responsibilities for vigilance. And again, with AI, we have a better chance of understanding what's going on. We can't all understand everything. We don't have time. We have, again, like 80, 100 years, maybe it'll be a little longer. But you only have so much time, but we can, as a society, distribute our attention across these different things and get places. So I've basically now come down to everything but the recommendations. And I don't think you should be surprised by my recommendation. My recommendation is we should choose utopia. Okay, thanks. Yeah, now let's go a little bit further. We have seen a lot of democratic backsliding. We've seen real disruption as a consequence of all the changes that have happened. And the way I'm thinking about this is that first there's this huge mudslip, you know, something goes wrong. And then what comes in is weeds, right? You know, it's like, what are weeds? They're plants that they have shallow root systems. They're relatively homogeneous. I think this is sort of what autocracies are. There's something that's been disrupted, and then the simplest, fastest moving thing gets in the first place. But if that stabilizes the soil, and so you can get back to your more richer ecosystem again. And so I hope, what I hope is that by communicating about these things and reasoning about them, that we can maybe even skip over some of these steps. But I'm hoping that we can more quickly, with less war than World War I or II, get back into this equilibrium where people at least have a shot, where there's at least social mobility, and people feel engaged with their governments and enjoy the corporations. So what do we need to do for all this? Well, whatever the solution is, it does have to be ecologically sustainable. I was talking to the German government started talking immediately. Of course, I'm in Berlin and not in Bath, so maybe if I was in London, I would have had more of that too. But anyway, when you say to them, oh, well, the sustainability is going to be like this, like with this thing with COVID, they just pale. Because it's been hard. It's been really hard. We all know it's been hard to get people to stay home and not get killed. So sustainability is going to be bigger. It's going to be more larger economic changes than what we've been going through. Well, maybe not larger, but anyway, at least on the scale and for a longer duration. But we have to come up with all the solutions people propose have to be economically, ecologically, emotionally, politically, they have to be secure. It's hard. So when we're thinking about our solutions, we have to think in all these ways. We should be investing in public goods, and I again we need to have some means of being able to reassure ourselves that this is going to good cause, which goes back to the vigilance things. But so the vigilance is partly our own responsibility, but we also need to pay tax. The protesting is also a bit like this weeds. There's been a lot, and there's people talking now about agile governance and things like that. And I actually, my PhD was agile development of AI. I'm into agile, but agile doesn't mean strip out all the structure, right? Agile means respond quickly and coming up with better methods and processes, but you need structure. Look at the Arab Spring. They all failed. They succeeded briefly, but then because they were so decentralized, because that was the only way to avoid being spotted by the police, they had no way to replace the structure with another structure, and so the old structure came back. The only exception was Tunisia, and apparently that was because the labor union hadn't been absorbed into the single party system. So that we need all kinds of structure to help us. We need to work to recognize the strengths and strengthen institutions that protect us, and I do think that's part of the problem. Transparency. We didn't know what was being done for us by our governments, right? So it's hard for us to tell that it's worth paying taxes, right? And again, we didn't even know that our governments weren't doing enough stuff for our neighbors that were only 40, 60 miles away, that they're being run into the ground, and we didn't notice. So again, AI may help us spot that kind of stuff and fix it earlier. And of course, we need to value and take care of ourselves and our neighbors. So that's it. Thank you for your attention. And I'm sure you probably want to talk about robots or something, but anyway.
Right. Thank you very much. That was great, Joanna. So I hope that you're keen to answer some questions.
Sure.
Now, running a question and answer session in Zoom is a little bit complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a couple of questions that have come in on the chat. And while we get on with that, those members of the virtual audience who would like to ask a question in person, maybe they could, first of all, if they would start their video so that I can see them. There's more than one screen's worth of faces here, so it may take me a little time to see you, but if you unmute and open up your video and get to see you. So the first
Yes,
question
I have
that
unmuted.
I'd like to ask on behalf of someone who's asked it is, are the AI rules that were defined by Asimov and developed since an effective means of defining and the scope and potential of AI? How far did they go, and have you had to do a lot since then?
Okay. Well, okay, so none of those rules, even Asimov's, okay, so first of all, Asimov's laws are computationally impossible. Like it's a physical impossibility to see all the consequences like in you know, iRobot. And also every single one of Asimov's short stories about those rules shows that there's bugs in them, right?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, geeks love them. But even Asimov's laws, and certainly the principles of robotics that we showed here, and the OECD principles of AI, all of those are not about, you know, limiting the scope of human culture. And notice, you know, that AI is a part of human culture. As I was trying to argue, that we can't think that, I mean, to some extent, we're the apes with the AI, right? We've been using technology, including language, to have lives that are inconceivable to the, and not even describable to the other apes, right? So it's wrong. The problem is thinking that AI itself is going to run off mechanically and do something, because as I was trying to say before, it's just very unlikely that we're going to engineer something, even engineer something that could engineer itself to be that stable without biological components. So we are talking about socio-technical systems. We are talking about the AI that we're building now, this phenomenal capacity. I mean, think about this network of people that are talking by Zoom. This is amazing, that to share these ideas and to learn this stuff and to be altering the world. So anyway, it's not about the scope. It's not about the potential. It's about how do we keep it safe while we're in, you know, like while we're increasing the scope, while we're increasing the potential. Because if we don't have a stable, sustainable basis, if we don't protect ourselves, you know, during Theresa May, I was asked to participate in an event. She actually thought that we should be AI ethics partners with China. That was her administration's. So where do they do this? Of course, Cambridge. So they had some big event at Cambridge. I was like one of 2 non-Cambridge people that they brought out there to talk. And so anyway, the Chinese colleagues were there, and I was at first, I was like, should I even get involved? But yeah, I asked a lot of people. They said, yeah, just go. It's better to have somebody saying there. It's like, okay. So I went, and the Chinese colleagues said, why are all these principles entirely about trying to protect individuals? I mean, individuals really, really matter. We get that. But so does the state. Without the state, you don't have anybody to protect the individuals, and you never talk about protecting the state. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't know. I never noticed that. And then just talking as I do off my butt, you know, I said, maybe it's because in the 20th century, more people were killed by their own government than by other governments. And so that's what we worry about. And then they looked really scared and stopped talking. So yeah, weird things happen here. But anyway, so yeah, no, so neither Asimov's impossible fictional, but to some extent underlying the OECD, you know, through the track that I chased, neither his laws nor the actual ones that we've all signed up to are about limiting the scope. They're or define, certainly not about defining the scope. They're really about saying, how can we make this work? How can we best realize and most explode our potential? That's what they're about.
Okay, I notice that Tim Hooker has unmuted. Tim, did you wish to ask a question? And if so, would you switch on your video?
No, I've tried switching on video, but that's not working. But no.
Oh, okay, well, just go ahead and ask your question, Tim. We can hear you.
No, I didn't have a question. It's just unmuting. It's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, hi, Tim. I'm happy to go off the other questions if you want to, although one of them.
Yeah, okay, so let's go with another of these chat questions. Does humanity represent the limit of future evolution of AI? I guess you did talk about this.
I did, but let's do it a little bit again. It's not. There's a limit that is. There are biological limits, although again, we might conceivably hack our biology and change what our cognitive limits are. But in terms of what we can attend to, what we can enjoy, how quickly we can have children, there are certain kinds of limits that are, again, as I just said, we can't really talk about AI separately from that. So when people talk about the evolution of AI, they might be in this metaphor where they think that AI is itself a species and then we're kind of watching it go and take out what. You're not. You're watching corporations exploit you. You know, you're watching science fiction, great narratives and great stories. I grew up with it too. It's great stuff. But so I think that we to some extent we are a limited constraint. And in other ways we're not, because like I said, it would have been inconceivable. It is still inconceivable to most apes what humans have, and in fact we have trouble understanding what we have. We have trouble realizing the potential we have. Trusting when you're talking to your undergraduates and you're trying to make them realize all the things they could do and what they can't do. They don't get that either, right? So it's a really big part of so we, to some extent, but if you think, are you saying that can we only be as intelligent as humans? No, we've gone superhuman in many ways. I mean, these books are superhuman. Some of them are going to remember things for centuries longer than I will, and yet in other ways they're more limited, right? And the same is true. Google is smarter than I'll ever be, and also can't tie its shoelaces, right? There's that every intelligence is not just a single chain. It's a range of capacities, and it isn't just them or us. It's us as the socio-technical system keep being able to do more and more amazing things. But I think the real answer to that question comes down to the answer in the next one, which is harder, like I said.
Yeah, actually, one could compare AI to science. I mean, science is a collective activity that does much more than any one scientist could do.
Absolutely.
I guess that the more people there are participating, the more can be achieved.
Right, exactly. And it's frustrating for us, you look at a paper from 40 years ago that got into Nature or Science, you're like, oh, I could do that, but now it's much harder because, again, that goes back to the human limits, because these magazines, they come out every week. How many papers can you put into that magazine that you even believe anyone is actually reading all the copies? Now, some people have just stopped doing that. There are online science journals that are just like, okay, forget about the page limit. Nobody's going to read this cover to cover anymore. Why don't we just put out everything that's good enough? And so, especially people that are open access and then they get paid for how many articles they produce, then they're like, yeah, let's just have thousands of articles per week, and who cares that not everyone will read them? So yeah, no, I absolutely think that AI and science are both things you can understand well. Again, when I talk about AI, I'm talking about really human culture expanding and enhanced by AI, but it is that we're capturing this knowledge in these different ways, and that humans are a component of that. So to some extent, we're a limiting component. But in other ways, we've exceeded in other directions, in our vectors, we've exceeded any dream that we could have had before.
Yeah. Okay, Tony Stott, were you ready trying to ask a question there?
Yes, I am, Stuart, actually. But
do you want to start your video, Tony?
Well, I have, but it says you cannot because the host has stopped it.
We can hear you though, so go ahead with your question.
Okay, just a second. There we go.
Great, Tony.
Right. Well, thank you, Joanna. That's a very interesting talk, and also I thank you for the breadth of and the range of issues you have raised. I'd like to narrow it, if I may, to a particular issue that I have, and this is with a company called Vodafone. I don't know if you know them.
I've heard of them.
They provide they provide telecommunications. I may jar a little with you in this. I'm a men's rights activist, and I also support a political party called Justice for Men and Boys and the women who love them. And recently I switched to Vodafone and looked up for the website J4MB, and it was not reachable. And I put in the Women's Equality Party, and that immediately flashed up with a big banner with Black Lives Matter and all the rioting and so on that was going on at the time. I complained to Vodafone, and they replied, we looked into this and found the restriction of certain web pages through our content control mechanism is determined by algorithms. We must advise you there is no way for us to see the exact piece of content which triggers a web page being restricted, as the process is purely automated.
Yeah. So this is a violation of the GDPR. So the GDPR, the GDPR says you need it, and well.
Sorry, it would be a violation if J4MB, the political party, was a person. It would be a violation of Article 22.
Right.
What would you suggest I respond? How should I respond to Vodafone?
That's difficult to do as an individual. I mean, because the point is that they need to know, because I mean, the best thing to do is shame them in the press, I guess. But because it's political, right? There's no, you can't have software where you can't go back and find those answers, right? And that's just not an acceptable system. So again, even if you're using a deep learning or something, you can go through and you can try different pages and then see, create a whole range of different pages and see which ones do and don't get suspended. So that there's means of going through and doing digital forensics and figuring out what is really triggering the problem. But the point is that somebody has to think it's worth their time to do that. And actually the new Digital Services Act is, I'm having trouble, they're only new and I'm having trouble keeping straight of which is which. But one of the new Digital Services Act, or the Digital Markets Act, is very, very much about that. And so it's mostly about addressing automated takedowns. It's funny because people think that it's like, contesting decisions, but the decisions are basically automated, and then you need to be able to go in and say, and contest it and figure out exactly what the problem is. So at least within the EU, if the UK decides to remain rules compliant on these things, then in 2 years there should be laws in place and procedures whereby they would be obliged to come up with a better answer than that. But you don't even know now if it's true or if they're just brushing you off that way. The computer says no, it's not going to be just like it's not worth our time to go find it out. But they may very well have a method that if it was if it'd been somebody more senior, if it was somehow blocking the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or something like that, then they would have figured it out. This has actually gone to the director's consideration. Yeah, good. Well, because there needs to be an answer, and it's not going to be. I mean, I was, I don't know. You could probably guess from the talk, I was reasonably glad that it wasn't Trump that got reelected in America, but at the same time, I was, when you try to understand what it means to be in a stable world, the fact that Twitter was like, you logged into Twitter and it said, you may see disinformation, but that in fact the vote is not decided yet. Or then it's like this tweet, of the leader of the country, this tweet contains disinformation. That's just, how do you regulate that? How do you I mean, I guess we did. I guess that was something civil society did, that we demanded but it wasn't all of us, because it was like half of America, not half, but still, a large number of Americans didn't want that to happen, and yet it was done. And so now a whole lot of Americans believe that China is controlling Twitter and Google because they must be the ones who undercut Trump, because who else could have done it, right? So, you know, and you know, because just imagine if it was your candidate that you logged into your favorite social media and there was this banner about how much they're lying to you. So it's, I mean, I do believe that those of us who have I'm not trying to be cultural relativists here. I think there's a good reason to believe that if something's published, you know, in the Lancet or in Science or Nature, that it has a slightly higher probability of being correct than if it's just made up, you know. But at the same time, I understand that there's a lot of people that don't see that. They don't understand where I am drawing authority, and I think authority is political.
Okay.
I think you made a very good point about it. We need to have transparency. We need to have access, and we need to see. We need to be able to, as a whole, as it were, we need to be able to see what's been going on.
But the thing is, even if we have transparency, which I would like, and it's very hard to get. I mean, again, look at Google, not this week, last week. The scandal of last week was that they fired somebody. And this is a company that's dedicated to sharing knowledge and making all knowledge open, and nobody could figure out what happened. Like, a lot of people jumped to some assumptions about what had happened, but you know, it's just like, you know, transparency is hard, and be able to communicate to people when they're very upset is extremely hard. And I think this is why the polarization thing really matters. When you're in danger of losing your house, you know, then a lot of things are going to seem a lot more obvious than maybe they should, because your brain is working on trying to survive. And so I think it's not only about transparency, it is also about social mobility, so that you know someone that you trust, that or at least you feel like you know when they would likely to lie to you, that you could call up and ask, like, how is this working, right? So we need to know someone who knows someone who works for big tech and that is a doctor and it's in the government. We need social mobility, and we need not to be under economics. You know, we need to like have the house that we thought we could own, that we could continue to own. Those kinds of things are necessary before the transparency is going to do any work.
Okay, Joanna, here's another question that I suspect was not entirely serious, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's almost Christmas. Was Theresa May an advanced form of AI that was sent back in time to change the future?
No. No.
Okay, maybe that one wasn't entirely serious there. Hang on a minute.
Stuart.
Hello.
You can't see me because I can't, for some reason or the other, I can't seem to turn my video on. I did put a question into chat. It's to do with the point about relationships with the humans and the ethical issues. May I ask that question?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. The question that I have is the ethics behind what's happening now, because every time I try to Google something, I cannot, because a big thing comes up, a box comes up and says, you need to trust us with your information. And if you don't accept, we can't allow you to, search any further. So I feel blocked out. I'm stuck because I can't do any research. And the question is, one of transparency. Why would I entrust my personal data without the option to select, which ones I don't mind sharing and which ones I do mind sharing? And the reason they want to share that information is so that they can help me get information that they feel I need. And so the decision is not mine, but someone else's. And I feel that an intrusion into, into my space, and it contradicts the terms that that you laid out, which I copied, which I took note of, about the safe way and to use AI, and to honor people's individuality and respect their need for privacy. So I was wondering where the future is in this, and am I blocked out forever? Because can I not use information technology anymore?
This is
without
this is
agreeing to my information being shared.
Thanks very much for that question, Dipali. What do you say to that, Joanna?
This is such a great question, and there's so many things going on here. First of all, if you just want to use a search engine that doesn't take any data, then DuckDuckGo. It's like duck, like the animal, DuckDuckGo. That's a search engine that doesn't take any data, and so you don't have to use Google. But of course, it won't do everything Google does. It's not as spectacularly good as Google. So then there's another piece, which is, the Google is one of the few things that when you use it so much that if you do take the time and go through all these pieces and see what you're setting and what you're not setting, I'm pretty sure that they're being reasonably honest about what they do and don't do. Of course, you're making a lot of decisions that you may feel you don't have enough information for, and they try to provide help and everything. But this is another side of transparency. You're becoming aware of how vulnerable you are, and that's making and you're probably, again, we can't be totally certain, but there's a lot of people working for Google that would blow the whistle if something was going wrong. You're actually safer with Google and all this information about exactly how they're using your data, and yet you feel less safe because they're being honest with you. And then some other organization that isn't bothering to tell you that much about what they're doing makes you feel safer, and that's like unfortunate. But anyway, DuckDuckGo, it's open source, you can go and look at it. The other thing is that so that was, I said Google is like one institution, but lots of institutions are popping up these enormously complicated things for you to go down. And then again, there may be like some news organization that you don't know much about, not one of your main ones that you usually use, like BBC. Somehow you wound up somewhere. Is it worth your time to go through all that stuff? How do you know? Do you trust them that they'll actually, the amount of time it would take to actually read and do all those things, people don't have that much time in their lives. And also, a lot of it is actually not about they say they're being GDPR compliant. They're actually not.
Exactly.
The GDPR says that every single thing when you come in, on the very front page, there should be one that's just turn it all off, right? That's supposed to be, first of all, you don't have to have that thing pop up. You only have to have that pop up if they're trying to take something without your consent.
Exactly.
And then secondly, there's supposed to be a button, and this is, I've noticed just in the last month or so, a lot of sites are making it much worse, I think, in the run up to the DSA. But it was always made to be worse than it really was in order to try to discredit the GDPR. But they failed. The DSA is here now, so, or almost here. At least it's released as a draft.
Yes, I mean, the transparency is only as far as telling you that they're going to use your data. But there's no transparency. It's complete opaqueness as to what they're going to use the data for and why. And why.
Yeah, like I said, it's hard to know for sure. You have to decide if you believe what they tell you. But they do try to explain it to you. And if you push all the helps and everything, I do think the Google one's a little better than most of them. But anyway, yeah. If you don't trust it at all, try going with DuckDuckGo, and there are other organizations on the internet that don't take your data.
Thank you.
If I could offer a comment there, Joanna, actually, this issue of the trust that we place in people who sell us goods or provide them in any way, this is not a special thing about digital goods, is it? I mean, if you buy a carton of milk, in the end, you have to trust the vendor that they haven't adulterated the milk.
Yeah.
So, this is not a new issue.
Yeah, and then some proportion of the time they do cheat. I mean, right? Like back when I was a village or something, then when everybody was worse off, everybody sort of knew that the sausages weren't as good as they were, like during hard times. So, but that's what trust is about. Trust is about making society work when you're all kinds of peers, and that you realize that you have to kind of slip a little bit in. You shouldn't trust an organization. That's not what we're trying to do. Trusting an organization that's so much larger than we are. That's why we need the transparency. But the transparency, the truth can be a bit scary.
Okay, I see that Charles Valdez has unmuted. Do you have a question, Charles?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the talk, Professor. It was really interesting. And
do you want to start your video, Charles, so we can see you?
I thought I'd better not, since I'm in a dressing gown. Thank you for the invitation.
There's transparency for you.
Yeah. No, I've been ignoring the topic a bit because I was so tired of kind of all the hype in the news from Silicon Valley and Elon Musk and all those types. So it was really helpful to have a kind of sort of comprehensive introduction to the whole topic. My question's sort of about AI. It's sort of just kind of generally, I think, about a lot of future technologies. But I have this feeling that with all this increase of kind of efficiency and optimization, we might lose sort of some of what you could call the kind of character or soul of some of the human activities, like the photo you had in the from the 70s with all those different shops selling different goods, right? And of course, you know, now I don't have any figures, I've not looked at it, but I'm sure there's hardly any of those, there's much less diversity. It's, you know, a few retailers, and these days it's increasingly just Amazon. So in a way that's great, in a way that's you know, we can buy a lot more things, we've got a lot more choice, but also paradoxically we sort of almost also don't, because it's like the increase in scale that what, like you said, that one producer or company can now exert means that sort of the smaller companies can't or agents can't really compete. So do you think there's a sort of trade-off with efficiency, but, you know, versus kind of sort of character? Does kind of difficulty in human activity kind of give character and culture to what we do?
Yeah, well, yes and no. So I get into arguments about this a lot. I hate Amazon. I don't like the way that they use venture capital to run their competition out of business. But on the other hand, what you've seen, and I have to say, Bath used to be pretty good. I don't know how it is right now, but it used to be pretty good for alternative places. And you know, they had at least a couple of bookstores. And Berlin is fantastic, like huge amounts of diverse, although it varies by neighborhood, but there's still, they've worked hard to try to keep the diversity. They're still, you know, fighting Airbnb and things and trying to keep the rents low enough that there could be people doing different things. But there's a lot of people that make handmade clothes around here, which I haven't lived anywhere that was like that for a long time. But anyway, so partly it's a choice, partly it's about governance. But anyway, the point is that even online, even through Amazon and things, that's actually allowed people that couldn't get their stuff together to have their own store to sell their arts. And again, they have to do some little viral things, either to their friends or somehow that they're discoverable. But in other ways, all that efficiency may make it so that people can come in and innovate, like TikTok, like, you know, innovate in an artistic way that wasn't there before. I worry though about if everybody has to be this little independent operator because there's this giant thing that's kind of squashing everything, which is literally the Chinese government model, right? That they're trying, that they like people to actually, people think that, oh, you can't say things on Chinese social media. You can say anything. They want to know what, you know, what you think, and if there's any problems, any corruption where you are. But what you can't say is, hey, let's get together and talk about this over a coffee. It's like, no organization, no political organization. That's the thing that they are trying to squash and that they censor very hard in China. And so I guess that's the thing I worry about, is that you could have the same thing from Amazon and Google, that these places are, that as soon as a small company looks interesting, it gets bought, and then it's integrated into one of the boards. It is that's a little worrying, because some things just require more scale. You want them to build up and structure more interesting things. So again, that's what the digital, I guess that's the Digital Markets Act, is trying to get on top of, to make sure that there can be a range of scales of organizations, and to get on top of some of these under-regulated areas of the enormous market capitalization companies doing all this leveraging. So yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm going to ask you a last question before bringing the Q&A to a close. I guess that I'm abusing my privilege as chair here, so I get to ask the last question. And you referred in your talk to this issue of personal autonomy. You said, well, you know, our lives are losing autonomy. There's just so much going on. And you talked about various ways in which this happened. You talked about kids not getting out and so on. And I just wondered if you had any personal strategies that you used to avoid being overwhelmed by the digital world. Can you share them with us?
Yeah, that's interesting. So life hacks. Yeah, I think, well, you can see that we're collecting books. Not everybody's in the luxury to do that, but I do think that the post-digital age is a possible thing. So I hope that people who do have those resources do that. I personally don't have email on my I do in front of a computer, and not something I do when I'm walking around, although I do read Twitter when I'm walking around just for fun, or to catch up on science. But anyway, I think a lot of people, yeah, I certainly don't have one of those voice activated thingies in my house, but it's, you know, some people find those really liberating. I don't want to say, you know, don't do that, but, you know, I had friends when I was in Chicago that didn't have credit cards because people could tell too much information about you. And in fact, I could have been Joanna at Gmail, but I was offered like alpha testing of that. But I thought, oh, Google already has too much information because how I click on the searches. And now, you know what, they have everything about me. I use it for my calendar and but that is, again, partly that I think that the corporation is set up in such a way that it would be hard for them to be that bad, although I'm glad that people are monitoring it. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. I guess I just try to, and I think some of it comes from practice, and that's one of the things people worry about, just knowing that there's an alternative, going offline sometimes. Actually, we decided to go on like one of these internet free things, so not just like email free, like not even doing anything with devices. And I don't know, I forget where we went. We went someplace for a few days, and then we were going to a wedding in Ireland, and we changed planes in London, and we saw the televisions. We hadn't been watching television either, and London was on fire, and there was people running around and rioting, and we're looking at each other. We're like, okay, we're turning the phones on. So we turned the phones on. It was the riots. So it was 2014. But anyways, that was my one experience of trying to shut down the entire internet for a week. But anyway, no, I think it's mostly about just finding time for yourself and noticing. Just you do think you have to be cognizant, right? You have to notice that when you're getting too much into a habit, and try to break out of the habits, and try to go for different experiences, remind yourself which ones you enjoy. So yeah, focusing on the aesthetic of it. Yeah, it's hard. It's harder to do this year. I loved going to museums, but you know, that's not how everybody does it. But yeah.
Yeah. So Joanna, I think we've all had a great time this evening. You've
I talked a half hour too long. I'm really embarrassed. I'm sorry.
You've told us a lot of stuff this evening, and we're all going to go away and really think about it. So I'm going to award you my personal Ghost of Christmas Future medal, and on behalf of our audience this evening, I'd like to thank you very much, just in case they can't manage to do it themselves now. But what I'm going to do now is risk overwhelming the world's broadband system by asking everybody to unmute all at once and doing a bit of clapping. So, okay, here we go.
Oh, someone was the guy. Well,
So
thank you.
that's really great. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite our ghost in the machine to terminate the meeting, and it's all going to go dark for everybody altogether, and they can all get a bit of digital free time and a cup of tea. So thank you so much. Happy Christmas.
Lovely.
Happy
Happy
Christmas.
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 Thank you.